I adjust the lapels of my plain black jacket and glance at my watch. 9 o'clock in the morning is a good time to make my rounds. It doesn't matter that I'm 65 and have owned this hotel for 20 years. Every morning I walk the hallways, checking rooms and chatting with the staff. Some guests, especially those who are not first-time visitors, recognize me and say hello. Others mistake me for a senior maid or manager. It doesn't bother me. In fact, I even like this anonymity, so I can see my hotel through my guests' eyes, unadorned and unflattering. "Good morning, Mrs. Hadley." Emma, one of the maids, walks by with a cart of clean towels. "Good morning, Emma. How was your night?" "Quiet?" Room 204 complained about the air conditioning, but Robert's already taken care of the problem. I nod and continue my rounds. The Everglade is my brainchild, my little paradise in Amherst. Not the biggest hotel in town, but probably the coziest. 3 floors, 48 rooms, including 6 suites, a small restaurant overlooking the garden, a conference room, and a spa. A white building with green shutters buried in flowers. I haven't always owned the hotel. My husband Harold and I used to rent an apartment and live modestly. He worked for an insurance company. I was a school teacher. We had a son, Leonard, our pride and joy. We dreamed that he would get an education and achieve what we could only dream of. But life made its adjustments. Harold died of a heart attack when Leonard turned 18. Suddenly I was alone with a college-age son in my arms and a modest insurance policy. We had to move to the small town of Amherst where my Aunt Eleanor lived. She owned an old motel on the edge of town that had seen better days back in the 70s. Illness prevented her from running the business, and she offered me to be her companion. I knew nothing about the hotel business, but I had no choice. Leonard was going to college, and money was needed more than ever. I worked as a secretary at a local law firm during the day and helped my aunt at the motel on evenings and weekends. It was tough at first. A motel with 10 rooms and a questionable reputation, where mostly truckers and couples looking for a couple hours of privacy stayed. 2 years later, Aunt Eleanor passed away, leaving me the motel as an inheritance. By then, Leonard had transferred to a prestigious university in New York, and I needed a way to support both of us. I decided to take a risk. I took out a loan, hired workers, and began to gradually turn the dilapidated motel into a cozy hotel. It was 15 years of hard work. Every dollar I earned, I invested in the business, gradually expanding the building, adding rooms, improving the service. Leonard had by then graduated from university and stayed in New York working for a large financial company. He rarely came to Amherst, and each time he stayed not with me, but in the town apartment I'd bought for his visits. "Mom, you don't expect me to stay in your hotel, do you?" he said, rolling his eyes. "I'm not a tourist or a business traveler. I need my own personal space." It hurt, but I kept quiet. I wanted my son to be happy, proud of his mother. I sent him money when he asked for it, paid off his education loans, helped with the down payment on the apartment in New York. Even when the hotel started making a good profit, I continued to live modestly, saving for Leonard. 3 years ago, he married Catherine Bellington, a girl from a family with a big name but a modest fortune. I met her at the wedding, tall, slender, with perfect posture and cold blue eyes. She held herself aloof, talking to me condescendingly, as if she were doing me a favor. When I presented them with a check for a substantial sum, she barely said thank you, as if it were a matter of course. After the wedding, their visits became even less frequent. I saw my son and daughter-in-law once every 6 months, usually when they needed money. Leonard always found a good reason, either to renovate their apartment, or to invest in a promising project, or simply temporary difficulties. I never said no. After all, who else would I work for? Catherine didn't show the slightest interest in the hotel. "Ah, those little family businesses. How nice," she'd say when I tried to tell her about the new rooms or the restaurant renovations. Leonard would also wave it off. "Mom, that's all great, of course, but you're not in Manhattan to talk about serious business." I sigh, remembering those conversations, and walk into the restaurant. Chef Julian is preparing breakfast for the guests, the air filled with the aroma of fresh pastries and coffee. "Mrs. Hadley, would you like a regular?" Diane, the barista, asks. "Yes, please." I sit down at my favorite table in the corner overlooking the garden and go through my morning mail on my tablet. Among the business emails and booking notices, one from the accommodation manager stands out. Mrs. Hadley, Mr. and Mrs. Lewis are expected to check into the Forest Suite today. They have requested extras, champagne in the room, flowers, and a special dinner. I've processed the request, but decided to notify you since the reservation lists an address in New York City that matches your son's. I feel my heart skip a beat. Leonard and Catherine booked a room at my hotel and didn't even let me know about it? That's odd. They usually stay in a city apartment. Something's not right. I quickly dial my son's number, but the call goes to voicemail. I write a message. Honey, I found out you and Catherine are coming over today. Why didn't you tell me? Is everything okay? The reply comes 10 minutes later. Hi, Mom. Yes, we'll be in Amherst for a fundraiser. Decided to stay at a hotel because the apartment needs cleaning. We'll talk when we get there. Cold and formal. Not a word about getting together, having lunch together. Just a dry notice. I sigh, but decide not to show offense. After all, they'll be at my hotel and I can see them, talk to them. The day passes in the usual routine, meetings with suppliers, solving minor problems, discussing next week's menu. Toward evening, I notice a bustle at the entrance. New guests have arrived. From my office window, I see Leonard and Catherine getting out of a cab. My son looks tense. My daughter-in-law is as impeccable as ever. Expensive dress, shoes from a famous designer, hair styled in an elegant bun. They don't notice me as they walk through the lobby to the front desk. I decide not to come down right away. Let them settle in, rest up from the road. I'll act like a normal hotel hostess, not intrusive. An hour later, I call the chef and ask if the special dinner for Suite 302 is ready. Yes, Mrs. Hadley. Everything is top-notch just as you requested. I'll carry it myself. The cook raises his eyebrows in surprise but doesn't argue. He knows that sometimes I personally serve special guests. It's a little quirk of mine to be close to the people who have chosen my hotel for their vacation. I put on my usual work attire, black pants, white blouse, and jacket. My hair, as always, is gathered in a neat bundle, minimal makeup. I take the cart with dinner and go up to the third floor. I stop in front of the suite door, take a deep breath, and knock. Come in, I hear Catherine's voice. I open the door and roll the cart in. The suite is beautiful. A spacious living room with panoramic windows, a separate bedroom, and a bathroom with a jacuzzi tub. Everything is in warm green and brown colors, mimicking a forest theme. Catherine is sitting on the couch, looking something up on her phone. She looks up and freezes when she sees me. Your dinner, madam, I say calmly, setting the dishes on the table. Filet mignon with wild mushroom sauce, salad with pear and blue cheese, and a bottle of champagne. Catherine looks at me with a look of bewilderment that is quickly replaced by a dismissive smirk. What are you doing here? She asks sharply. Bringing your dinner as you ordered. You work as a waitress in a hotel. Really, Nomi? Her voice is full of contempt. Does Leonard know about this? God, this is embarrassing. What if one of our friends sees you? I continue setting the table, not responding to her tone. I asked what you were doing here, Catherine repeats louder. This hotel suite is no place for maids. Get out. At that moment, Leonard comes out of the bathroom with a towel around his shoulders. Cat, what's the matter? He asks, then notices me. Mom, what are you doing here? I slowly straighten up, squaring my shoulders and looking straight into Catherine's eyes. This is my hotel, I say calmly but firmly. Catherine's face changes. First bewilderment, then shock, then something akin to fear. She shifts her gaze from me to Leonard, who stands frozen, mouth open. What do you mean your hotel? She finally squeezes it out. This hotel? The whole thing? Yes, Catherine. The whole hotel belongs to me. Every room, every fork in the restaurant, every towel in the bathroom. And I sometimes personally bring dinner to special guests. It's called hospitality. Silence falls. A silence so dense it seems you can touch it with your hands. Catherine looks like she's been punched in the face. Leonard stares at the floor, avoiding my gaze. There was a heavy silence in the room. I stood with my back straight and stared at Catherine's dazed face. Her perfectly lined eyes widened, her mouth hanging open in mute amazement. Leonard shifted from foot to foot, still avoiding my gaze. dinner's getting cold, I said finally, pointing to the set table. I recommend trying the filet while it's hot. The chef has outdone himself tonight. Catherine seemed unable to find the words, which was rare for her. Usually, my sister-in-law wasn't one to mince words, especially when it came to putting someone in their place. Now she looked like a fish that had been thrown ashore, opening and closing her mouth without making a sound. Mom, listen, Leonard finally spoke up. We didn't know you personally. Well, room service. Catherine was just surprised. Surprised? I raised an eyebrow. Calling me a maid and kicking me out of the room is called surprised? Catherine finally came to her senses. Her face had taken on its usual haughty expression, but there was still concern in her eyes. Nomi, you have to realize what it looked like from the outside, she began in her condescending tone. We check into a posh hotel, and suddenly you show up as a maid. It's odd, to say the least. I thought you had some little roadside motel, not... She circled her hand around the luxurious room. Not this. Haven't you ever wondered what I do? I asked calmly. In 3 years, you never once asked about my business, never wondered how I managed to help you financially. Apparently, you thought money grew on trees. Leonard stepped forward, coming between Catherine and me as if protecting his wife. Mother, let's not make a scandal out of this. Catherine didn't mean to hurt you. It was just a misunderstanding. I looked at my son for a long moment. His dark hair, inherited from his father, was beginning to thin at the temples, wrinkles around his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. When had he gotten so old, and when had he become such a stranger? Okay, Leonard, let's consider it a misunderstanding, I agreed. But we need to talk. Not now. Over dinner. Come to my house tomorrow for lunch. We can't, Leonard replied quickly. We have a charity event tomorrow afternoon, and we were planning to have dinner with the Richardsons in the evening. The Richardsons are in Amherst? I wondered. Richard Richardson was Leonard's boss, and his presence in our small town seemed odd. Yes, they're here for a fundraiser, too. It's an important event, Mom. In support of the Children's Hospital. I understand, I nodded. Then we'll meet for breakfast. 8 o'clock in the morning at the hotel restaurant. Leonard opened his mouth to object, but Catherine suddenly intervened. Of course, Nomi, we'll be there. I nodded and headed for the door. Already on the threshold, I turned around. Enjoy your meal. Back in my office, I sank heavily into my chair. My hands trembled slightly, the effects of the adrenaline rush. I wasn't used to confrontation, especially with my own son. All my life, I'd tried to avoid conflict, to give in, to compromise. Maybe that's why Leonard grew up the way he did. I'd allowed him too much, too often turned a blind eye to his selfishness and arrogance. The phone vibrated, a message from Leonard. Mom, I'm sorry about the incident. Catherine feels terrible. We really didn't know you were personally doing room service. Why are you even doing this? You have a staff. I didn't bother to answer. Too tired to explain. Yes, I have a staff, a whole staff of professionals. But this is my hotel, my pride, and sometimes I want to make sure everything is perfect. And sometimes I'm just lonely in a big empty house, and I come here to feel needed. The night passed restlessly. I tossed and turned, remembering Catherine's face when she'd called me a servant and Leonard's confused look. How had we gotten to this point? When had my favorite boy, my only son, become this cold, alienated man? This morning, I arrived at the restaurant at 8 sharp. I chose a table in the corner overlooking the garden and ordered my usual breakfast of oatmeal with fruit and a cup of strong tea. Leonard and Catherine were 20 minutes late. When they finally showed up, Catherine looked flawless. A slip dress, perfect makeup, not a hint of embarrassment or remorse. Leonard seemed more tense, his smile strained. Good morning, Mom. He leaned over and kissed my cheek. He smelled of expensive cologne and a slight odor of alcohol. Sorry I'm late, we got held up. That's okay. I pointed to the chairs across from me. Have a seat. Have you ordered breakfast yet? Yes, at the counter. Catherine lowered herself into a chair with the grace of a ballerina. Should bring it over. You have a great restaurant, Nomi. I'm impressed. Thank you. I sipped my tea. Glad you like it. There was an awkward pause. Leonard was looking at his phone, Catherine was studying the interior of the restaurant with the look of an art connoisseur. The waiter brought their breakfast, eggs Benedict for Leonard and fruit salad for Catherine. So, I began as the waiter stepped away. Tell me, how are you two doing? Leonard, how's work? My son hesitated, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Fine, he answered uncertainly. The usual routine. You know how it is. No, I don't. I looked him straight in the eye. You never tell me about your job. I'm not even sure what exactly you do at your company. Leonard wrinkled his nose. Mom, it's boring financial stuff. You're not interested. Did you ask? I felt irritation building up inside. Have you ever once wondered what I'm interested in, what I love, what I dream about? Or do you just assume you know me? Catherine cast a warning glance at her husband. He sighed and set his fork aside. Okay, Mom. I understand you're upset about last night, but let's not ruin breakfast. I'm not upset, Leonard. I'm disappointed. I straightened up in my chair. Yesterday I saw how my sister-in-law treats me when she thinks I'm just a regular hotel worker, and how my son doesn't take my side when I'm insulted. It was a misunderstanding, Catherine interjected. I've already apologized. No, you haven't. I shook my head. I didn't hear the word sorry from you yesterday or today. Catherine pressed her lips together but remained silent. Leonard squirmed awkwardly in his chair. Mother, we didn't come here to fight, he said quietly. We have. News? I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. Could it be that Catherine was pregnant? The thought evoked a strange mixture of hope and anxiety. On the one hand, I'd always dreamed of grandchildren. On the other, seeing how my son and his wife treated me, I doubted they would allow me to be a part of their child's life. Yeah, I'm having trouble at work. Leonard spoke softly, almost in a whisper, looking around as if he was afraid someone would overhear. I might be downsized. I felt a prick of worry. What happened? Reorganization, new management. You wouldn't understand. It's complicated. There's that dismissive, you wouldn't understand again. As if I'm incapable of comprehending his great financial problems because of my provincial mind. Try explaining, I offered. I've been running a business for 20 years. Maybe I'm not as stupid as you think. Leonard exchanged glances with Catherine. She nodded faintly. Okay, he leaned closer. Ia made a mistake. Invested client money in a project that seemed promising, but it all went wrong. Now I'm in trouble. What kind of problems? I asked, feeling my heart clench. Financial and reputational. If I don't pay the money back, I won't just get fired. There could be legal repercussions. I took a deep breath, trying to comprehend what I'd heard. You wasted the client's money? I did not. Leonard raised his voice, then looked away and continued more quietly. I invested. It was a calculated risk. It was just unlucky. And how much would it take to cover that calculated risk? Leonard named an amount that took my breath away. It was millions more than I could spare without selling the hotel. Leonard, I don't have that kind of money. Yes, you do, Catherine interjected. Your hotel is worth a lot more than that. You could take out a loan against it. I stared at her, not believing my ears. You're suggesting I risk my life's work to cover Leonard's mistake? It's not just a mistake, Mom. My son looked almost frightened. If I don't solve this problem, I could go to jail. The word hung between us, heavy and threatening. Prison. My son could end up behind bars. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I asked, feeling my voice shake. When the trouble first started? I thought I could handle it. Leonard ran a hand through his hair. Tried to find investors, took out a few loans, but time's running out and Richardson's starting to suspect something. Is that why he's here? To keep tabs on you? Partly. I told him I have a potential investor in Amherst. He wants to meet with him. And who is this investor? Leonard exchanged glances with Catherine again. No one so far. I thought you'd help. I leaned back in my chair, trying to digest what I'd heard. My son, to whom I'd given everything I had committed a financial crime and now expected me to risk my business to save him. Why are you staying at the hotel? I asked suddenly. Why not in an apartment? We sold it, Leonard admitted, lowering his eyes. 6 months ago. Needed the money. And you didn't tell me? I didn't want to bother you. Didn't want to bother you, I repeated. Or were you ashamed to admit you were broke? Leonard remained silent, which was more eloquent than any answer. You know what the weirdest thing is? I continued. The fact that you've never taken an interest in my business. You never asked how I managed to turn a dilapidated motel into a successful hotel. You were ashamed that your mother was just the landlady of a provincial hotel, unworthy of the attention of your rich friends. That's not true, Leonard objected unconvincingly. Is it? Then why did you never tell Catherine about my hotel? Why did she think I owned some little roadside motel? Leonard remained silent, avoiding my gaze. Catherine tapped her fingers impatiently on the table. Look, she said finally, this is all very touching, but we don't have much time. Leonard is facing jail if we don't find the money in the next few days. You're his mother, Nomi. Are you really going to let your only son go to jail when you can help? I looked at this woman, at her cold eyes, at her perfect makeup, and wondered if she really loved my son, or if he was just a source of status and money to her. And what will happen when she realizes the money has run out and the status is threatened? Catherine, I will think about your situation, I said calmly. But don't expect an immediate decision. I need to think it over. We don't have time, she exclaimed. Richardson expects an answer tomorrow. Then you should have come to me sooner, I rose from the table. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with the vendors. Breakfast is on the hotel, of course. I turned to leave, but Leonard grabbed my arm. Mom, please. I could read the desperation in his eyes. I know I screwed up. I know I haven't been a good son. But I'm asking you to help me. Not for my sake, for your own. You don't want your son in jail, do you? I gently released my hand. I'll get back to you later, Leonard. Walking out of the restaurant, I headed not for a meeting that didn't exist, but to my office. I closed the door, sank into a chair, and let the tears I'd been holding back all this time finally flow. I wasn't crying for the money I could lose, or even for my son's reputation. I was mourning our bond, our family that I now saw existed only in my imagination. All these years I had thought Leonard was just busy, that his infrequent visits and formal calls were the result of a busy work schedule. I believed that deep down inside he was still the same loving boy I'd raised. Now I saw the truth. My son was ashamed of me. Ashamed of my business, my background, my provincial accent and unfashionable clothes. I was a burden to him, a reminder of a past he wanted to forget. And that realization hurt deeper than any insult from Catherine. I spent the rest of the day in a kind of daze. I mechanically performed my duties, talking to the staff, checking reservations, but my thoughts kept returning to the conversation I'd had with Leonard and Catherine that morning. Their words, their looks, their tone, it all kept running through my head like a broken record. In the evening, I returned to my house, a small cottage about 10 minutes from the hotel. I had once dreamed that Leonard would come often, that we would have dinner together on the terrace, discussing his work, my business, my life. I'd even set up a separate room for him, which had remained almost untouched over the years. Kicking off my shoes, I went into the kitchen and put the kettle on. My thoughts were restless. The amount Leonard had mentioned was enormous. To get that kind of money, I'd really have to mortgage the hotel, maybe even sell part of it. Everything I'd spent 20 years building could disappear overnight. But it wasn't just about the money. Catherine's words, her contemptuous tone when she'd mistaken me for a servant, showed her true attitude. And Leonard's reaction, or rather, lack thereof, had opened my eyes to how little I meant to my own son. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Valerie Patterson, an old friend of mine. We'd met when I'd first moved to Amherst. She was a lawyer at the same firm where I worked as a secretary. Valerie is retired now, but we're still close. Nomi, is something wrong? Her voice sounded concerned. I rarely called this late. Leonard's here, I said, and that was enough. Valerie had always seen right through my son, even when I was blind myself. Oh dear, how much this time? I named the amount. There was silence on the other end of the line. You're kidding, Valerie finally uttered. He can't seriously be asking you for that much. He can, and seems to really be in serious trouble, says he's squandered his client's money and he's facing jail. Nomi, I'll be at your place in 20 minutes. This is not a phone call. Exactly 22 minutes later, Valerie was always punctual. Her old Volvo appeared in the driveway. We sat on the patio with the bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Well, it was definitely a special occasion. So tell me everything in order. Valerie took off her glasses and wiped them with a napkin, as she always did when she was preparing for a serious conversation. I told her everything. Leonard and Catherine's unexpected arrival, the incident in the room, the conversation at breakfast. With each word, it was as if a heavy weight was being lifted off my shoulders. Now tell me honestly, Valerie, am I a bad mother if I don't give my last to save my son? My friend shook her glass thoughtfully, watching the wine leave thin paths on the glass. You know, Noemi, when we first met, you were very different, she began. A confused widow with a teenager in her arms, no experience, no confidence. I remember you saying your only goal was to give Leonard everything you never had. Education, connections, opportunities. She took a sip of wine and continued. And you did just that. Sent him to the best schools, paid for a prestigious university, supported all his endeavors. You denied yourself everything so he wouldn't need anything. And look what he's become. Don't say that, I grumbled. He's my son. It's because he's your son that I say that, Valerie was adamant. You don't see what I see. Leonard has always been a spoiled, selfish man. Back in high school, he used your love and guilt to get everything he wanted. And when he grew up, he just changed tactics. I opened my mouth to object, but I couldn't. Deep inside, I knew Valerie was right. How often had I justified Leonard's behavior? How often had I turned a blind eye to his manipulations, his lies, his neglect? I just wanted him to be happy, I whispered. And do you think he's happy now? Valerie leaned closer. Living beyond his means, marrying a woman who is, forgive me, a real bitch? Constantly afraid his facade will crumble, that someone will see what he's really like? I remembered Leonard's face this morning, tense, haggard, with shadows under his eyes. He certainly didn't look happy. What do you suggest? I asked, feeling completely lost. Stop saving him, Valerie replied simply. For 20 years you've been prostrating yourself before him, and what do you get in return? Neglect and manipulation. It's time to put an end to that. But if I don't help, he could go to jail. And if you do, he'll continue his scams, knowing Mom will always back him up. And the next time, the amount will be even bigger, and the consequences even more serious. I leaned back in my chair, letting Valerie's words sink in. There was bitter truth in them. All these years, I'd been less of a support and more of a crutch for Leonard. I hadn't helped him become stronger. I'd only allowed him to not change, to not grow up, to not face the consequences of his actions. What about the hotel? I asked, looking up at the starry sky. Is it worth risking my life's work for a son who doesn't even appreciate me? You know the answer to that yourself. Valerie squeezed my hand gently. This hotel isn't just a business. It's your accomplishment, your independence, your pride. You built it from the ground up, turned it from a wreck into a place to be admired. And you're willing to give it all away to a man who's ashamed of what you do? Her words struck like lightning. Suddenly, I saw everything in a different light. How many times had Leonard come, not to see me, but to ask for money? How many times had he refused to tell his friends what his mother was doing? How many times had I swallowed my resentment when he canceled appointments or forgot to call on my birthday? I've spent so many years trying to earn his love, I mumbled, feeling tears come to my throat. And all this time he's been ashamed of me. Valerie hugged me silently, letting me cry. When I finally calmed down, she wiped my tears with a tissue, just as she had done years ago when I mourned my husband's death. Listen to me, Nomi Hadley, she said firmly. You are a strong, intelligent, successful woman. You've created a thriving business, given jobs to dozens of people, built a reputation you can be proud of. And you don't have to prove that to anyone, not your son, not his wife, not anyone else. I nodded, feeling something new slowly ignite inside, not anger, not resentment, but quiet determination. What should I do about Leonard? I asked. I can't just leave him in the lurch no matter how he feels about me. You can help him in another way, Valerie pondered. Not with money, but with advice. Refer him to a good lawyer, for example. Show him you support him as a mother, but you're not going to cover for his mistakes. I considered her words. It sounded reasonable. Support, but not indulgence. Caring, but not saving. And if he won't accept that kind of help, then it's his choice, not yours, Valerie was adamant. You can't live his life for him, Nomi, and you don't have to sacrifice yours for him. We talked until late into the night. Valerie stayed at my place. It was too late to drive home. When I finally got into bed, my head was heavy with wine and thoughts, but my heart felt strangely calm. It was like I'd finally shed a weight I'd been carrying for too long. In the morning, I woke up with surprising clarity in my head. I showered, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook. I always thought better when I wrote down my thoughts. The first thing I did was call Tom Burrows, my financial advisor. Tom had helped me manage the hotel's finances from the beginning, and I trusted him completely. Tom, I need your advice. Hypothetically, if I needed a large sum of money, say several million, what would my options be? Tom whistled. Nomi, what's going on? Are you going to buy another hotel? No, I just want to know my options. Well, your financials are good, and the hotel is priced high. You could get a loan against it, but that would be risky. If you can't make the payments, you'd lose the business. Or you could bring in an investor, but then you'd have to share control. I listened to his explanation, taking notes. The amount Leonard had quoted wasn't just large, it was exorbitant for a business my size. To get that kind of money, I'd have to not just take a risk, but actually put everything I had on the line. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate your honesty. After that call, I dialed the number of Brian West, an old friend of Harold's who was now a partner in a prestigious law firm. Brian, I need some information. If a man embezzled client money from a finance company, what might be the consequences? Noemi, this is serious. Brian's voice became strained. We're talking embezzlement, fraud, possibly even money laundering, depending on the circumstances. The punishment could range from a hefty fine to jail time. What if this person, hypothetically, wanted to remedy the situation? What would you advise? Immediately contact an attorney specializing in financial crimes. It may still be possible to negotiate voluntary restitution and a reduced sentence, but every day of procrastination makes the situation worse. I thanked Brian and wrote down the contacts of several lawyers he recommended. Then I leaned back in my chair, contemplating the situation. My son was in trouble. Serious, possibly even criminal trouble, and my maternal instinct was screaming, "Save him! Do whatever it takes, but don't let him suffer." But the other part of me, the part that built a business from nothing, the part that survived the death of her husband and raised her son alone, that part was saying otherwise. It was saying, he's a grown man who made a choice, and now has to face the consequences of that choice. You won't help him by saving him all the time. I remembered Leonard growing up, a smart, charming boy who always knew how to get his way. If a teacher gave him a bad grade, he blamed the education system. If a friend took offense at his words, he'd say he was too sensitive. There was always an excuse, it was always someone else's fault. And I let him believe it, afraid of disappointing him, afraid of losing his love. And in the end, I lost his respect. Valerie was right. It was time to stop being his lifeline and let him learn to swim on his own. Or drown, if he so chose. I picked up my phone and texted Leonard. Come by my office at the hotel at 3 o'clock this afternoon. We need to talk. Alone without Catherine. The reply came almost instantly. Thanks, Mom. I knew you would help. Love you. Those words, which once would have warmed my heart, now elicited only a bitter chuckle. He already thought that I had agreed to give him the money, that I would, as always, save him from the consequences of his own actions. But not this time. I spent the rest of the morning putting my thoughts in order and planning what I would say to my son. Then I headed to the hotel, where I had a few routine matters to attend to. In my office, I pulled an old photograph from my desk drawer. It showed Harold and I holding little Leonard in our arms, all three of us smiling at the camera. We were so happy, so full of hope. What would you do, Harold? I whispered, looking at my husband's face. You've always been wiser than me on such matters. I could almost hear his answer. To love is not to indulge, Nomi. Sometimes to love is to be firm. There was a knock at the door. It was exactly 3 o'clock. Leonard was always punctual, especially when money was involved. "Come in," I said, tucking the picture back into the drawer. Leonard walked in, looking more put together than he had yesterday. Fresh shirt, hair neatly styled, but his eyes gave him away. Restless, intense. "Mom." He leaned over to kiss my cheek. He smelled of expensive cologne and the slight scent of alcohol. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Have a seat, Leonard." I pointed to the chair across from me. "I have an answer to your request." He sat down, leaning forward impatiently. His gaze was hopeful, even confident. He had no doubt that I would give him the money. I always did. "I can't give you that amount," I said calmly, looking him straight in the eye. The smile slowly slid off his face, replaced by bewilderment, then disbelief, and finally anger. "What? But you've always helped me." "Yes, I have. And I will, but not with money, not this time." I put a piece of paper in front of him with contacts written down. "These are lawyers who specialize in financial crimes. I talked to Brian West, and he thinks it's still possible to minimize the damage if you seek legal help right away." Leonard ignored the sheet, his face growing redder and redder. "Lawyers? You think I haven't tried them? They all say the same thing. You need money to close the hole or jail is inevitable. So we'll look for other solutions. Maybe sell your apartment in New York." "Oh yes, you've already sold it." He pounded his fist on the table. "This isn't funny, Mom. I'm facing real jail time, don't you understand?" "I understand, Leonard, and I'm sorry you're in this situation, but I can't risk the hotel to cover your debts." "Risk the hotel?" he almost shouted. "This hotel is nothing compared to my life." "Do you love these walls more than your own son?" His words should have hurt me, made me feel guilty. In the past, it would have. But now I saw right through him, his manipulation, his selfishness, his inability to take responsibility for his actions. "I love you, Leonard," I said quietly. "And that's exactly why I won't give you money. Because if I save you again, you'll never learn to stand on your own 2 feet." He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Maybe he did. Maybe he was seeing for the first time not just his mother, willing to do anything for him, but a woman who finally realized her worth and was no longer going to let him or anyone else devalue her hard work, her accomplishments, her life. "I'll help you find a good lawyer," I continued. "I'll be there for you when you go through this, but I won't give you any money." Leonard stood up, his face contorted with rage. "You're going to regret this," he gritted through his teeth. "When I'm in prison, you'll wake up every night knowing you could have prevented it." "Maybe," I remained calm. "But I'll definitely be sorry if I let you get away with your actions again. It won't make you better, Leonard. Only worse." He turned and walked out, slamming the door loudly. I remained seated at the table, feeling a strange mixture of pain and relief. This was probably the hardest conversation I'd ever had in my life, but also the most honest. I realized that this conversation could mean the end of our relationship with my son. He might never forgive me for not saving him once again. But I also realized that our relationship had been far from healthy for a long time. I was not a mother but an ATM machine, not a person worthy of respect, but a convenient resource to be used. And I wasn't going to put up with that anymore. My business that I had built with my own hands deserved to be protected. My life, which I had lived with dignity, deserved respect. And I myself deserved better treatment than I was getting from my son and daughter-in-law. For 20 years, I'd given everything for Leonard. Now it was time to think about myself. After Leonard left, I stayed in the study, feeling strangely empty. The conversation with my son had knocked me out, but I didn't regret the decision. For the first time in years, I had put my own interests ahead of his demands, and it felt both frightening and liberating. I devoted the rest of the day to work, immersed in accounting reports and plans to expand the spa. The familiar routine helped keep my mind off my son, his anger, and what he might do next. When I finally got home late that night, fatigue took its toll, and I fell asleep almost instantly. The morning greeted me with the ringing of the phone. It was 6:30 on the clock, too early for a business call. I knew right away it was Leonard. "Mom!" His voice sounded softer than yesterday, almost ingratiating. I'm sorry about yesterday. I was upset and said some unnecessary things. Good morning, Leonard. I sat up on the bed, fully awake. I'm glad you called. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I realize you want what's best for you. He paused. Maybe we could talk again? Over breakfast? I want to explain the whole situation to you in more detail. I heard the falseness in his words. Leonard hadn't changed his mind overnight, he'd just changed tactics. Instead of threats and anger, it would now be honey and spruce. The old song I'd heard dozens of times. Okay, I agreed nonetheless. 8 o'clock at the hotel restaurant. After hanging up, I stood under the shower for a long time, gathering my thoughts. Leonard wouldn't give up trying to get the money. I knew that clearly. The question was how far he was willing to go. I arrived at the restaurant before the appointed time and took a table in the corner where I had a clear view of the entire room. To my surprise, Leonard wasn't late either. He showed up at 8 sharp, but he wasn't alone. Catherine was with him. They both looked impeccable. He in a business suit, she in an elegant cream-colored dress, the perfect couple from the cover of a glossy magazine. Only strained smiles and dark circles under their eyes gave away their inner state. Good morning, Mom. Leonard leaned over and kissed my cheek. I hope you don't mind Catherine joining us. We're in this situation together. Of course, I nodded and turned to my sister-in-law. Good morning, Catherine. She smiled her trademark smile, polite and cold at the same time. Good morning, Nomi. You have a lovely hotel. I never tire of admiring it. Flattery, another tool in their arsenal. I just nodded, not giving in to this game. We placed our order, and while we waited for breakfast, Leonard began his offensive. Mom, I understand your decision. I really do. He spoke softly, looking me straight in the eye. You're right. I should have been more responsible. And I swear that once this situation is resolved, I will completely change my attitude towards finances. I listened silently, watching his face. How many times had I heard those promises? This is the last time, Mom. I'll change, Mom. I'll pay it all back, Mom. And every time I believed. But right now I really need your help, he continued. I talked to a lawyer like you advised. He said that if I return the money to the clients before the case reaches a formal investigation, the chances of avoiding criminal prosecution are much better. And what did he suggest? He advised that I find the funds by any legal means and as soon as possible. I sipped my tea, mulling over his words. What options do you have besides me? Leonard exchanged a quick glance with Catherine. I've exhausted all options, Mom. Sold the car, everything I could sell. Tried to find investors, but no one wants to mess with that kind of risk. And Catherine's parents? Catherine tensed. My parents aren't in a position to help. They're having financial difficulties themselves. I remembered how at their wedding, Catherine's father had given a toast about the old Bellington family, whose roots go back into New England history. Lots of pathos, little substance. Apparently, a high-profile family name was the only asset they had to offer. I see, I nodded. Still, Leonard, I can't give you that amount of money. It would jeopardize not only my business, but the future of many people who work here. His face petrified. So you favor your employees over your own son? I favor responsibility over recklessness. These people rely on me. They work honestly, don't commit financial fraud, and don't expect someone to come along and solve their problems. Catherine made a quiet sound, something between a snort and a chuckle. I turned to her. Is something wrong, Catherine? No, nothing's wrong. She shook her head with feigned politeness. It's strange to hear a mother say that. Mothers are usually willing to do anything for their children. Children don't usually squander millions of other people's money, I parried. And usually daughters-in-law don't treat their mothers-in-law like servants. Catherine blushed, but quickly pulled herself together. I've already apologized for that misunderstanding. No, you haven't. I sipped my tea calmly. Not once. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unable to find something to say in response. Leonard hurried to intervene. Mom, let's not get distracted. We're talking about my future, about possible prison. Exactly, I nodded. About your future. And I think the best thing I can do for that future is to let you face the consequences of your actions and learn to deal with things on your own. You just don't get it. He raised his voice, drawing the attention of neighboring tables. We're talking about prison, about years behind bars. Do you really want that for your only son? I felt a lump come up to my throat. Of course I didn't want that. The thought of Leonard in prison broke my heart. But I also realized that saving him now would only delay the inevitable. He would continue to live the life he was used to, irresponsible, wasteful, relying on Mom to always back him up. I don't want you to go to jail, Leonard, I said quietly. But I also don't want you to spend your life running away from responsibility. I can help you find a good lawyer. I can give you moral support. But I won't give you any money. That's cruel, Catherine interjected. You're his mother. How can you be so cold? And how can you be so arrogant? I turned to her. For 3 years you've had my support, lived on my money, never wondering where it came from. And the first thing you did when you saw me in a role you consider low was insult me and order me to get out. Catherine turned pale. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. Don't pretend, Catherine. You showed your true colors when you thought I was just a servant. And you know what? I'm grateful for that moment. It opened my eyes to who you really think I am. Leonard pounded his fist on the table. Enough! This is not what we're talking about. No, Leonard, that's exactly what this is about. I straightened up. About how you and your wife have treated me all these years, how you're ashamed of me in front of your friends, how you never talk about my business, how you accept my financial help without thinking about what it's costing me. I'm not ashamed of you. Really? Then why did Catherine think I owned some roadside motel? Why did you never bring your friends to my hotel? Why did you avoid introducing me to your coworkers at your wedding? Leonard remained silent, avoiding my gaze. I continued, feeling the years of silence and repressed feelings finally finding an outlet. You know what the saddest part is, Leonard? The fact that I let you treat me like this. I was so afraid of losing your love that I was willing to put up with neglect, forgotten birthdays, last-minute canceled visits. I always found excuses for your behavior. You're busy, you're stressed, you're just not as attentive as the other kids. I paused, gathering my thoughts. But the truth is, you're just a spoiled brat who never grew up. You're used to getting everything you want without putting in any effort. And I'm just as much to blame for that as you are. Catherine looked at me with ill-concealed hatred. Leonard seemed stunned, as if he'd been punched in the face. It's not fair, he finally squeezed out. I've always loved you, Mom. Always been grateful for your help. Loved? Perhaps. Been grateful? I doubt it. Grateful people don't take without thinking of the consequences. They don't disappear for months, and then only show up when they need something. There was silence. Leonard stared at his plate, Catherine fidgeting nervously with her napkin. I suddenly felt a deep fatigue. Not physical, but emotional. Tired of years of pretending, of playing the happy family we never had. I'm leaving. Catherine suddenly stood up. This is pointless. She's not going to help. Leonard cast a warning glance at her. Catherine, sit down. No, she grabbed her purse. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this. We have better things to do than dig through old grudges. She turned around and walked briskly toward the exit, attracting the attention of the other diners in the restaurant. Leonard sighed. I'm sorry for her. She's on edge about the whole thing. I understand, I nodded. But it doesn't change my mind. He was quiet for a moment, then leaned closer. Mom, please. I know I haven't been the best son. I know I haven't appreciated you the way I should have. But give me a chance to make it right. Help me now. And I swear I'll change. I'll visit you more often, help you with the hotel, be the son you deserve. His voice sounded sincere, his eyes glistening with tears. I almost believed him. Almost. Leonard, if you really wanted to change, you wouldn't have put conditions on it. You'd just change, without any ifs or give me a chance. You're a grown man, not a child who needs permission to get better. He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. You just don't want to help. You don't care what happens to me. No, Leonard, I do care. That's exactly why I refuse to give you the money. Because it won't make you better. Only worse. He stood up, face contorted with anger. You're going to regret this. When I'm arrested, when my name is in all the papers, when your precious innkeepers are whispering that the landlady's son is a criminal, you'll regret it. Perhaps, I remained calm. But I'll definitely be sorry if I let you escape responsibility for your actions again. He left without saying goodbye. I stayed at the table, finishing my cooled tea and looking out the window at the hotel garden where Henry's gardener was pruning the rose bushes. A simple, ordinary scene that somehow brought me more comfort than all the words I could say to my son. Back in my office, I plunged into my work, trying not to think about Leonard, about his threats, about the possible consequences. Around noon, there was a knock on the door. "Come in." I looked up from my papers. To my surprise, it was Catherine standing on the threshold, alone without Leonard. Her face was tense but determined. "May I speak with you, Nomi?" I pointed to the chair opposite. "Of course, have a seat." She sat down, placing her designer purse on her lap like a shield. "I came to talk about Leonard," she began. "He's desperate. I've never seen him like this." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied sincerely. "But my decision remains the same." "I understand," she nodded in surprise. "And to be honest, I don't blame you. Leonard really did make a terrible mistake." That admission surprised me. I'd expected more manipulation, threats, pressure, but not this. "Then why did you come?" Catherine took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior in the room. It was unforgivable." I watched her carefully, trying to see if she was sincere. Her face seemed serious, but her eyes gave it away. Cold, calculating. "Is this a new tactic, Catherine? Is Leonard sending you to apologize, hoping it will soften me up?" She flinched slightly, then straightened. "No, Leonard doesn't know I'm here. He wouldn't approve." "Then what is the reason for this sudden remorse?" Catherine was silent for a moment, as if choosing her words. "I don't want Leonard to go to prison, and I thought, maybe if I apologize, if we smooth things over, you'll soften." There it is. Just another manipulation, more subtle, but the essence is the same. "Catherine, I appreciate you coming, but my decision has nothing to do with that incident or how I feel about you. It's a matter of principle and what I believe is best for Leonard in the long run." She pressed her lips together, her mask of politeness beginning to crack. "Best? You think prison would be best for him? I think facing the consequences of his actions will be better than running from them, even if those consequences are painful." Catherine looked at me with ill-concealed hatred. "You are a cold, calculating woman, Nomi. I always knew that, but I didn't realize you could be so cruel to your own son. And you are self-serving and arrogant, Catherine. I always knew it too, but I hoped I was wrong." I allowed myself a weak smile. "See, we're both disappointed." She stood up abruptly, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You're going to regret this." "You're the third person to say that to me in the last 2 days." I shook my head. It's amazing how people who cause their own problems expect others to have to solve them, and if they don't, they'll regret it. Catherine turned and walked out, slamming the door. I sighed. This conversation was inevitable, but that made it no less unpleasant. Catherine had never treated me with respect, but at least she had a semblance of decorum. Now that the masks were off, she showed her true face. The face of a woman who sees people as a means to her ends. I walked to the window, looking out at the hotel parking lot. Catherine was walking briskly toward the cab. There was fury in her movements, tense shoulders, sharp gestures. What would she and Leonard do next? I didn't know, but I braced myself for the worst. That evening, just as I was about to leave the hotel, the phone rang. It was Tom, the restaurant manager. "Mrs. Hadley, we have a problem. Your son and his wife are having dinner at the restaurant, and Mr. Hadley. He's had a few too many drinks and is acting inappropriately." I sighed. That was the only thing missing. "What exactly is going on, Tom?" "He's talking loudly, telling the other guests that this is your hotel and that you're—" "Sorry, Mrs. Hadley, but he says you refuse to help him in his predicament and he's calling you some less than flattering words." "I'll be right down." When I entered the restaurant, the scene was worse than I expected. Leonard was sitting at a table in the center of the room with a glass of whiskey in his hand, talking loudly to a couple at a nearby table. Catherine sat next to him, clearly embarrassed but not trying to stop him. "And do you know what she said?" Leonard gestured, sputtering out his whiskey. She said I should face the consequences of my actions, my own mother, when I'm facing jail time. The couple at the next table looked awkward, not knowing how to respond to this inappropriate monologue. I walked over to their table. "Leonard," I said quietly but firmly, "I think you should go up to your room and get some rest." He looked up at me with a cloudy gaze. "Ah, there she is, the owner of this fine establishment." He waved his hands theatrically. "My mother, who favors her business over her own son." "Leonard, please." I put my hand on his shoulder. "You're disturbing the other guests." "Disturbing?" He roughly dropped my hand. "I'm just telling the truth about what you're really like. All these years you've pretended to be a loving mother, and in reality you don't care about me." Other diners in the restaurant began to turn around, attracted by the noise. I could feel their gazes on me. Curious, judgmental, sympathetic. "Leonard, if you don't stop, I'm going to have security escort you out," I said quietly. "Security?" He laughed bitterly. "You're going to throw your own son out? Sure, why not? You're ready to send me to prison, aren't you?" Catherine finally intervened, placing her hand on his forearm. "Leonard, let's go. This isn't helping." He shook off her hand. "No. I want everyone to know what she's really like, smiling at customers, playing the part of a welcoming hostess, but in reality she's a cold, heartless—" "That's enough," I interrupted him, feeling the anger building up inside. "You're drunk and out of control. I'm not continuing this conversation here." I nodded to the manager who stood nearby, ready to intervene. He walked over to our table. "Mr. Hadley, let me escort you to your room." Leonard looked at me with unconcealed hatred. "This is how you solve problems? Making me look like an unwelcome guest?" "I'm trying to make this as dignified as possible, Leonard. Don't make it difficult." He stood up, staggered, and dropped his glass, which shattered with a loud clink. Shards scattered across the floor, whiskey spilling out in a dark puddle. "Dignified? What dignity is there to talk about when a mother refuses to help her son?" I looked at him. Drunk, angry, out of control, and I saw not a grown man but a hurt child who hadn't gotten the toy he wanted. And I felt infinitely sad, not from his words or the looks of the other guests, but from the realization that my son had never grown up. That all my sacrifices, all my efforts to give him a better life had led to this. A man who was incapable of taking responsibility for his actions. "Leonard," I said quietly, "go to your room. We'll talk when you're sober." "There's nothing to talk about." He shook his head. "You've made up your mind. You chose your precious hotel over me. Well, fine. Enjoy it. Enjoy your solitude within these luxurious walls." He turned abruptly and, without waiting for Catherine, headed for the restaurant's exit. She gave me one last hateful glance and hurried after him. The morning was overcast, matching my mood. I sat on the terrace of my house, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fog lift over the garden. After the incident at the restaurant last night, I hadn't been able to sleep for a long time, replaying Leonard's words, his angry face, the judgmental stares of the diners. I expected to feel shame, guilt, regret. But strangely, I felt only fatigue and something akin to relief. It was as if the heavy weight I had been carrying for years had finally fallen from my shoulders. The masks were off, the pretense was over. I now saw my relationship with my son for what it really was: painful, toxic, based on my fear of loneliness and his desire for my support. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. It was Henry, the hotel manager. "Good morning, Mrs. Hadley. I hope I didn't wake you." "No, Henry, I've been up a long time. Is anything the matter?" "Mr. Hadley and his wife have just checked out of the hotel. They refused to pay the bill, saying that as your relatives, they are entitled to free lodging." I sighed. It was so like them to use kinship with me when it benefited them, and reject it when it imposed obligations. "Put the lodging on my personal account, Henry, and send me a full account of what was ordered for the room." "Already done, Mrs. Hadley. I'm afraid there's an impressive sum in there. Champagne, room service dinners, spa services." "No surprise there?" I grinned bitterly. Leonard has always had a knack for spending money, especially other people's money. Finished with the conversation, I finished my cooled coffee and made a decision. It was time to set the record straight, to formalize what I'd already decided in my heart. Leonard and Catherine were no longer my family. An hour later, I was sitting in the office of Michael Foster, my attorney and longtime friend. A gray-haired man with shrewd eyes, he'd known me since the days when I'd first purchased the motel and had helped with the legal aspects of the business all these years. Nomi, to what do I owe this early visit? He pointed me to the chair across from his desk. I want to change my will, Michael. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for me to continue. I want to exclude Leonard from the heirs completely. Michael leaned back in his chair, looking at me intently. That's a big decision, Nomi. What happened? I briefly recounted to him the events of the last few days, the arrival of Leonard and Catherine, the incident with the servants, the demand for money, the scene at the restaurant last night. Michael listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally. I'm sorry to hear that, he said when I finished. But are you sure you want to eliminate it completely? Maybe you should keep at least a small portion? He's your only child, after all. I've thought about that, Michael. But no, this isn't an impulsive decision driven by resentment. I've watched Leonard spend my money for years without appreciating it or understanding the hard work behind it. If I left him the hotel, he'd destroy everything I'd spent 20 years building, sell it or bankrupt it, and all the people who work here will lose their jobs. Michael nodded, understanding my logic. What do you plan to do with the hotel? I'm thinking of setting up a foundation. Some of the stock will go to senior employees who have worked with me for at least 10 years. Some to a charitable foundation that will support the local community. And I want you to be one of the trustees of that foundation, Michael. He smiled. I'm honored by your trust, Nomi, and I think it's a wise decision. The hotel will remain in the hands of people who really care about it, and the profits will go to good causes. Exactly, I nodded. As for personal property, I'll leave the house and savings to my cousin Helen and her children. They've always treated me with warmth. Unlike... I didn't finish the sentence, but Michael understood. All right, I'll get the paperwork ready. But I must warn you, Leonard may contest the will. Let him try, I shrugged. He has no grounds. I'm of sound mind and good judgment. No one is pressuring me. And I'm not even leaving everything to some random person. I'm setting up a foundation to serve the community. Michael nodded, making notes. I'll make sure everything is legally flawless. The paperwork will be ready in a couple days. Leaving Michael's office, I felt a strange calmness. The decision had been made, the way back was cut off. It was painful but necessary, like extracting a bad tooth. First the pain, then the relief. I decided to walk to the hotel, enjoying the spring air and the simple joy of movement. Amherst was beautiful this time of year. The trees were turning tender green, tulips and daffodils were blooming in the front gardens, birds were chirping in the branches. I walked slowly, noticing details that I usually didn't pay attention to. The window of a small bakery with delicious croissants, an old man playing chess with himself in the park, a young mother pushing a stroller and humming something to her child. Life went on, my life, without Leonard and Catherine, without the constant feelings of guilt and obligation, without the fear of losing my son's love, which I now realized had always been conditional. I reached the hotel and paused for a moment, admiring its facade. White walls, green shutters, potted flowers at the entrance, just as I had once envisioned. My creation, my pride, my little world in which I was mistress of my own destiny. Inside, I was greeted by the familiar hum of voices, the clinking of dishes from the restaurant, the soft music in the lobby. I said hello to the staff, exchanged a few words with regular guests, checked new reservations. An ordinary day, ordinary worries. But I felt different, lighter, freer, as if I'd dropped a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for too long. In the evening, Valerie called me. How are you, Nomi? I heard about yesterday's incident. News travels fast in a small town, especially when it comes to a public scandal at the most popular hotel. Better than you might think, I answered honestly. I was at Michael's today, changing his will. Oh, Valerie was quiet. A serious step. But a necessary one, I told her about my plan with the foundation and employee stock. You know, that's very much in your spirit, Nomi. I could hear the smile in her voice. Even in a situation like this, you're thinking of others, not about everyone else, I sighed. I cut my son out of my life, Valerie. What kind of mother does that? A mother who gave everything she had for 20 years without getting anything in return. A mother who finally realized she deserved respect, not neglect. A mother who found the strength to say, enough. Her words warmed my soul. Valerie always knew how to find the right words at the right time. Thank you for supporting me, I said quietly. Always, darling. By the way, that's not the only reason I'm calling. I have tickets to the theater this weekend, a new production of The Cherry Orchard. Will you come with me? I smiled. I used to turn down invitations like this a lot, staying late at the hotel or saving money for Leonard. Now I no longer had those excuses. My pleasure. The next few days passed in the familiar rhythm of work. I signed the new will, discussed the details of the foundation with Michael, and held a meeting with key staff members, telling them my plans. I didn't mention the conflict with Leonard, just explained that I wanted to secure the future of the hotel and everyone who worked there. The response was touching. Many of these people had worked with me for years, some from the beginning. They knew how much labor I had put into the business, and the news that they would be getting a stake in it was met with genuine gratitude. You've always been more than just a boss, Mrs. Hadley, said Maria, the head maid who had worked at the hotel for 15 years. You've created a real family here. Her words hit something deep inside me. Family. I clung so desperately to the idea of family with Leonard that I overlooked the family I already had. People who respected me, appreciated my labor, shared my values. On the 5th day after Leonard and Catherine left, I received a text from my son, brief, dry. Mom, we need to talk. This is serious. Can I come over today? I hesitated. My first impulse was to refuse, to cut off all contact, but then I decided I had to give him a chance to speak. After all, whatever had happened between us, he was still my son. I couldn't change that fact any more than I could change the color of my eyes or my blood type. Come over at 3 o'clock, I'll be home. At exactly 3 o'clock, Leonard was always punctual when it came to money. A cab car appeared in the driveway. My son got out of it alone without Catherine. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, and his suit looked wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. I met him on the doorstep without inviting him in. Leonard. Mom. He nodded, clearly feeling awkward. Thank you for agreeing to meet. What did you want to talk about? He glanced back at the cab that was still waiting. Why don't you invite me inside? This isn't porch talk. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face. The other part of me wanted to hug him and tell him everything would be okay, like I'd done when he was little. Instead, I stepped back silently, letting him inside. We made our way to the living room and I pointed him to a chair. Tea? Coffee? No thanks, he sat down, nervously rubbing the cuff of his shirt. Mom, I came to apologize for my behavior in the restaurant. It was unacceptable. I nodded silently, waiting for him to continue. Apologizing was a good start, but I knew what would follow. And I understand your position on the money. It's your right to decide how to handle your funds. Another nod on my part. Leonard took a deep breath. But there's something you should know about. I talked to a lawyer as you advised. The situation is worse than I thought. If I don't resolve this soon, I'm actually going to be arrested. And not just arrested. The prosecutor is talking serious time. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. Despite everything that had happened between us, the thought of my son in jail was painful. There's something else. Leonard looked genuinely frightened. Catherine, she filed for divorce. Said she didn't sign up for a criminal husband, and that her family wouldn't survive such a disgrace. I couldn't say I was surprised. Catherine had always struck me as the kind of person who would be there for me while things were good and disappear at the first hardship. And where is she now? Back at her parents' place in Boston. Took everything she could take from the apartment, the jewelry I gave her, the designer stuff, even the coffee maker. He tried to smile, but the smile came out bitter. I'm sorry for your marriage, Leonard, I said in a neutral tone. But I don't understand what you expect me to do. He straightened, gathering his thoughts. I know you changed your will. Michael Foster is a friend of my coworker's father. And news travels fast in legal circles. I tensed. This was it. It wasn't remorse that had brought him here, but the news that he'd been disinherited. Yes, I changed my will, I confirmed calmly. It's my right. Of course, he nodded too hastily. I'm not disputing that. But Mom, do you really want all those years of work, everything you've created, to go to some outsiders instead of your family? My family? I allowed myself a weak smile. Leonard, you said yourself at the restaurant that I chose the hotel over you. Now that's not true. I wasn't choosing between the hotel and you. I was choosing between continuing to be your ATM and finally starting to respect myself. He wrinkled his nose as if in pain. I never considered you an ATM, Mom. No? What did you think I was? When you came by once every 6 months just to ask for money? When you forgot to call on my birthday? When you were ashamed to tell your friends what your mother was doing? Leonard was silent, unable to find the words to object. I've set up a foundation, Leonard, I continued. The hotel will be taken over by a board of senior staff and outside trustees. Some of the profits will go to charity, some to business development, and some to the employees who have worked here for years, putting their heart into every little detail. And there will be nothing left for me? His voice trembled. And what would you do with the hotel if you got it? I asked bluntly. Would you sell it at the first opportunity to cover your debts? Or would you try to run it from New York with no experience or desire to get into the details? He didn't answer, but his face said it all for him. Of course he would sell the hotel. To him it was just an asset, a line on the balance sheet, not a life's work. Look, Leonard, I softened my tone. I haven't cut you out of my life. You're my son, and I'll always love you. But I won't be your lifeline anymore. You're a grown man, and you have to take responsibility for your own actions. Even if those actions lead me to jail? His eyes glistened with held-back tears. Even then, I nodded. I'll visit you if you want me to. I'll write letters, send you books. But I won't give you money to save you from the consequences of your own actions. Leonard stood up abruptly, his face contorted with anger. You're a monster, not a mother. What kind of mother would let her child go to jail when she could prevent it? A mother who wants her child to finally grow up, I replied calmly. A mother who realizes that sometimes the greatest love is letting a person face the consequences of their actions. I'll never forgive you for that, he gritted through his teeth. Never. Maybe, I shrugged. It's your right, just like it's my right not to be your eternal sponsor. He turned and headed for the exit, but stopped at the door. You know what the ironic thing is? I was really proud of you. The way you built this whole thing from nothing. I just never told you. You should have. I smiled weakly. You should have spoken up, Leonard. And not just talk. Show it. Because love isn't words, it's actions. He didn't say anything, just slammed the door so hard that the glass in the windows rattled. I was left standing in the hallway feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Perhaps this was our last meeting. Perhaps years later, after he'd served his time, he would understand and forgive me. Or maybe he never would. Either way, I knew I had done the right thing, for him and for me. 3 weeks later, Leonard was arrested. I learned about it from the local paper, a small story on page 3 about a financial scandal at a prestigious New York company. His name was mentioned among the others involved in the case. I cut the note out and put it in my desk drawer, next to his childhood photos. The trial was scheduled for the fall. I didn't go. Leonard had made it clear he didn't want to see me. But I followed the trial through a lawyer I knew. Leonard was found guilty of embezzlement and fraud, but thanks to a good lawyer, who I suspected had been paid for by Catherine's parents to avoid more scandal, he received the minimum sentence of 3 years with the possibility of parole after a year. Life went on. I immersed myself in working on expanding the hotel, opened a small conference center that quickly became a popular place for business meetings and seminars. I started spending more time with friends, enrolled in the French language course I had long dreamed of. On weekends, I went with Valerie to the theater or to concerts. Sometimes, especially in the evenings, when I sat alone on the terrace of my house, I felt a longing for Leonard, not for the grown man who had betrayed my trust, but for the little boy with freckles on his nose who hugged me and told me that I was the best mother in the world. But this longing was light, without the bitterness that used to accompany thoughts of my son. I learned to live without the constant feelings of guilt and obligation, without the fear of losing his love. I learned to appreciate what I had: a successful business, loyal friends, the respect of others, and most importantly, the self-respect I had gained by finally setting boundaries. One day, almost a year later, I received a letter from prison, a plain white envelope with a correctional facility stamp. Inside was a piece of paper written in familiar handwriting. Mom, I don't know if you read this or if you immediately threw it away when you saw the return address, but I must write. It's a lot to think about, and I finally realized that you were right. All my life I expected the world, and you, to forgive me anything, to save me from any consequences. I've never truly thanked you for all you've done for me, for the sacrifices you've made. I'm ashamed, Mom. Ashamed of the way I treated you, the way I let Catherine treat you, the way I took your help for granted. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you were right, and I finally realized it. Leonard. I reread the letter several times, feeling tears flow down my cheeks. Not tears of grief or disappointment, tears of relief. Maybe my son had grown up after all. Maybe all was not lost. I didn't reply right away. I put the letter in my desk drawer with the photos and the newspaper clipping. Time would tell if his words were sincere, if he had really changed. In the meantime, I had my own life, my own road, and for the first time in many years, I felt that I was walking down it with my head held high, without looking back or regretting the decisions I had made.